Hello, in this video I shall be showing you how to set up Eclipse Codewind in a remote Kubernetes configuration. When starting developing microservices with Codewind, you will likely develop using your favourite IDE and Docker Desktop all installed locally on your Mac, Windows or Linux machine. As your application grows, you may start to notice the extra demand on your local machine resources. With Codewind's remote support, it's possible to continue developing your microservice in your IDE, but utilise the Kubernetes cluster resources that are running in your hybrid or public cloud. Whether using local or remote, the development experience will be exactly the same. Let's now take a look at how to install Codewind Remote. Make sure you are already logged in and can connect to your Kubernetes cluster via the command line. Codewind's remote installation is performed via an operator. To get the operator, you must git clone the Codewind operator repository. Once downloaded, cd into the deploy subdirectory. Within this directory, we can see the files used by the operator. To start the install, we use the install shell script using the operator parameter and by passing the ingress address for a Kubernetes cluster. I can find the ingress address from my Kubernetes web console overview page. Simply paste in the ingress and hit enter to start the operator installing. The installation takes a few minutes to complete, depending on your internet connection speed. The final steps install Keycloak, and the status moves from pending to container creating and finally running. Once completed, the installation script shows the name of the Codewind service as well as the HTTP address to access the installed Keycloak service. I'll copy this address and paste it into my browser, as I need to use this Keycloak instance to create my Codewind user access account. I log into the Keycloak instance as admin and then navigate to Manage Users to create a new user account. I shall now add myself as a new username called Andy. This is the username I shall use to log into my remote Codewind instance. Next I hit Save. Once created, I can go to Credentials and set up a new user password. We have now successfully created and configured the Codewind Keycloak service with a new user account. The next step is to install a dedicated Codewind instance for the new user. To do this, we again go back to the command line window, using the same install shell script, but this time using the Codewind parameter, followed by the -n and a unique name for this Codewind instance, followed by a -u and the username we need to use for authentication. In this case, I will use the Andy user that we just added to Keycloak. The operator will now install and configure our Codewind instance. Once again, this may take a few minutes to complete. My remote Codewind installation has now finished, so I can proceed to connect via my local IDE. To do this, I will need to copy the access URL, which was shown at the end of the installation process. Next, I bring up my IDE. In this case, I will use Visual Studio Code. From the Codewind view, I select the cloud icon to create a new remote connection. I am prompted to give my new connection a unique label. Now I need to configure the connection to my remote Codewind instance. I use the access URL from the installation process, and the username is Andy, and the password is the same as I set in Keycloak. Codewind has now successfully connected my local IDE to my remote Codewind instance. The final step, I must configure Codewind to use my preferred container image registry. I select Add New Registry, and in this case I will set up a connection to docker.io using my personal Docker credentials. Codewind confirms the successful connection from my remote Codewind instance to my Docker registry, and I'm ready to start developing. Developing against a remote Codewind instance is exactly the same as when using a local Docker desktop. I start from the Codewind panel, but rather than select local, I will add my new project from my remote connection. As usual, I am first asked to select the application template I wish to use. I'm going to select Node.js Express. Next I name my application My Express App. Codewind now asks me where to store project files locally for the editor. I'm going to select my Codewind workspace. These source files are kept locally for my editor, but any changes are mirrored to my remote Codewind containers whenever I hit save. I can now see that Codewind is pulling in its dependencies and building my Express application, but not locally. This is all now being performed in my remote Codewind instance, running in the cloud. Once again, this initial creation and build may take a few minutes, depending on the speed of your network connection. My application is now showing as running. As with local, I can simply click on the application link in the Codewind panel to see it running in my development cloud. I can confirm this by looking at the browser URL and changing it to the Express Applications sample Codewind endpoint. As with local Codewind, it is just as easy to access the logs from my remote Codewind instance, all without having to leave the IDE. Simply select Show All Logs and then select between the list of available log files. Getting access to the inside of your container is easy too. Simply select Container Shell to open a new terminal window. Again, all without having to leave your IDE. Finally, let's jump out to our Kubernetes dashboard running in the cloud, where I can clearly see my new applications running. Find out more by visiting codewind.dev and by following us on Twitter.